The air over Europe in 1944 was not just a battlefield, it was a storm of steel. At 25,000 feet, American B-17 bombers pushed through sub-zero skies where frost formed inside the fuselage and every breath depended on an oxygen mask. Below them lay Nazi Germany. Around them, black bursts of anti-aircraft flak bloomed like deadly flowers, each explosion throwing razor-sharp metal through the sky. The engines droned steadily, but every crew member knew the truth. One mistake up here meant disappearing forever into the clouds. And on this mission, a single second would trigger one of the most unbelievable mid-air collisions of World War II. By this stage of the war, the Allied bombing offensive was relentless. Huge formations of B-17 flying fortresses crossed into Germany almost every day, flying deep over enemy territory in tight defensive boxes. Their targets were critical: oil plants, weapons factories, rail lines, the industrial lifelines of the Third Reich. Each bomber carried 10 men, multiple gun turrets, and tons of explosives. From a distance, the formations looked unstoppable, but the reality was far different. Every mile deeper into German airspace meant heavier flak, more fighters, and shrinking chances of survival. Because once these bombers were spotted, the Luftwaffe would be waiting. German air defenses were built for moments like this. Radar stations tracked incoming bombers long before they were visible, giving fighter units time to scramble. Within minutes, Messerschmitt interceptors were climbing fast to meet the formations head-on. The tactics were simple but deadly. Close the distance quickly, fire at vulnerable sections, and break away before defensive gunners could react. But combat at high altitude was pure chaos. Thick flak clouds, blinding sunlight, and smoke from damaged aircraft made depth perception unreliable. At speeds closing in on hundreds of miles per hour, even a tiny error in judgment could turn an attack into a disaster. As one German fighter lined up its attack run, the sky suddenly erupted with anti-aircraft fire. A flak shell burst dangerously close, filling the air with smoke and shockwaves. For a brief moment, visibility vanished. The fighter was already diving fast, committed to the approach. Inside that split second of confusion, distance and timing were lost. By the time the pilot could see clearly again, the bomber was no longer a distant target. It was directly ahead. There was no time to pull away, no room to turn. The closing speed was too high. And then, in an instant, metal met metal. The German fighter's propeller and nose slammed directly into the B-17's rear fuselage. The sound was a violent tearing of aluminum and steel, echoing through the sky. Inside the bomber, instruments flickered and the tail section shuddered under the force. Normally, such a collision would have sent both planes spinning out of control, plummeting to certain destruction. But in this unbelievable moment, the fighter didn't separate. It became lodged inside the bomber. The propeller blades bent and dug into the fuselage, locking the two aircraft together like a twisted mechanical monster hovering thousands of feet above the ground. Inside the German cockpit, chaos reigned. The plane vibrated violently. Controls felt heavy and smoke filled the small space. The pilot expected the aircraft to break apart at any second, yet miraculously, the fighter was still flying. The B-17's massive frame had absorbed part of the impact, strangely stabilizing the fighter instead of destroying it. The controls were sluggish and unpredictable, but they responded. For a fleeting moment, both aircraft hung together in the sky, a grotesque fusion of metal, defying every rule of physics and every expectation of survival. Other German pilots witnessing the collision were stunned. They radioed urgent commands: bail out immediately. A fighter carrying debris from an enemy bomber was not meant to land. Every instinct screamed survival meant abandoning the aircraft. But the pilot hesitated, whether driven by shock, determination, or the sheer impossibility of the situation. A decision was made. Attempt the impossible. Fly the fused aircraft back to base. Every adjustment of throttle or stick had to be measured perfectly, because any sudden movement could tear the planes apart and send both crashing into the earth below. Meanwhile, the B-17 itself was in critical condition. The rear fuselage was mangled, control cables were severed, and structural integrity was compromised. Maintaining altitude and stability was nearly impossible. Some accounts suggest that parts of the crew tried desperately to regain control, while others were forced to bail out with parachutes. Whether the bomber would survive even a few more minutes remained uncertain. Yet somehow, amidst the chaos, both aircraft remained airborne, a terrifying testament to luck, physics, and sheer improbability in the skies over wartime Europe. The German fighter began its slow, careful descent toward friendly territory. The added weight and twisted metal from the B-17 completely altered the plane's aerodynamics. Drag increased, balance shifted, and every movement of the controls risked catastrophic failure. The pilot had to compensate constantly, adjusting throttle and angle with extreme precision. One wrong turn, one sudden maneuver, and both aircraft could have broken apart instantly. Inch by inch, the fused plane made its way across the sky, a bizarre and dangerous hybrid defying every expectation of what was possible in mid-air combat. As the aircraft approached German airspace, ground crews could hardly believe their eyes. On radar, it looked like a normal fighter, but visually, it was something else entirely. The Messerschmitt's nose was twisted and bent, carrying the massive wreckage of an American B-17. Sparks and smoke trailed from its damaged frame. It looked less like a plane and more like a mechanical creature stitched together in the chaos of war. Runway personnel scrambled to assess the impossible sight, knowing that landing this damaged, fused aircraft would be the most dangerous task imaginable. Landing the fused aircraft was a nightmare in motion. Deploying the landing gear could shift its fragile balance. Too fast, and the twisted metal could collapse entirely. Slowly, the pilot aligned with the runway, reducing speed with extreme caution. Every foot closer brought a new threat, a bounce, a scrape, a sudden imbalance. Then, finally, the wheels touched down. The aircraft bounced violently once, sparks flying as stressed metal ground against asphalt. But against all odds, the landing gear held, and the aircraft slid along the runway until it came to a complete stop, motionless yet miraculously intact. Silence fell over the runway. Ground crews rushed forward, their eyes wide with disbelief. The German pilot climbed out of the cockpit, shaken but alive. In the nose of the fighter, fragments of the B-17's fuselage remained embedded, a stark reminder of the mid-air collision that should have ended in disaster. Mechanics and soldiers inspected the twisted wreckage, unable to comprehend how such an impossible landing had been achieved. Above all, this surreal scene captured a truth of war. In the chaos of battle, survival often defies every expectation. World War II was defined by heroism, strategy, and tragedy, but also by unpredictability. High-speed combat at extreme altitudes left no room for mistakes, and yet, in this single incredible incident, a fighter pilot survived a collision with an enemy bomber. Against every expectation, against every rule of physics, the aircraft landed safely with part of the B-17 still lodged in its nose. It stands as one of the most surreal stories of the war, a reminder that in battle, reality can be stranger than fiction, and sometimes survival is almost impossible to explain.